Okay, we are now live. Good afternoon, everyone. This is the first of what we hope is going to be a series of webinars on SharePad. My name is Richard Chiesa, and I am the support manager here at Ionic Information. In this first webinar, we are going to go through the basic navigation of a program. So I assume that you know nothing about the program at all. This is SharePad, as most of you will recognize it from the first time you logged into the program. Now, the SharePad is divided, as you probably have noticed, into two sections, what we call the blue section on the left and the green section on the right. The blue section will normally contain a list of instruments. At this moment, I have a FTSE 100 list, but it could be any list of instruments, even one that you create yourself. And on the green section on the right, we have details about one of the shares or one of the instruments selected on the left hand side. At the moment we have a chart, and if we select a different share on the list on the left, the chart of that instrument will appear on the right hand side. At the top, you will see the main toolbar here where I'm currently moving the mouse. You'll have blue buttons that affect the blue section and green buttons that will affect the green section. The first two buttons should be pretty much self-explanatory. FTSE 100 will open up a list of FTSE 100 shares. FTSE 350 will open up a list of FTSE 350 shares. The third button will open up a list of all the lists that are covered in the program. The next two buttons are for portfolios, which we'll look at in a moment. And the very last button is the market overview button. This is slightly different from the lists, and I will show you this in a moment. I'll now go back to the FTSE 100. The two views, the split screen view, can be edited slightly. If you want to see it have a bit more space on the left or on the right, you can point your mouse arrow or use your finger if you're using a tablet here in between the two sections. Click, drag left, drag right or drag left to increase or decrease the size of either section. You'll notice there are three buttons here at the top. The first button will zoom the blue section into full screen. The green button on the right will zoom the green section into full screen, and the middle button will return you back to a split screen mode. Each window has a set of a sub toolbar with buttons that are relevant for that section. So we have buttons here that will affect the list you're on, and buttons here that are used to edit the graph. The first thing we're going to look at is searching. Now, you'll notice a nice bright orange search button here at the top. If we select it, a search window will open up. We can search for instruments using either their name or their TIDM, EPIC code. So, for example, I could type Barclays, and Barclays will be displayed on my search results. If I click on OK, the selection will jump to Barclays. Alternatively, I can type in the code GSK, and SharePad will find GlaxoSmithKline. You can also use CDL codes or ISIN codes to find the instrument, and this is particularly useful if you're searching for funds, as often it's hard to identify the specific class of fund that you're looking for. If you are using a device with a keyboard, you don't actually need to press the search button. The moment that you hit a letter key, the search box will appear and you can then continue typing. Now when you perform a search, by default the SharePad will search for the instrument within the list that you're currently in. We are currently in the FTSE 100 list, and it'll say here on the top right. So if I look for example, ASOS, I won't get any results because ASOS is not in the FTSE 100 list. Now, if you're not sure, you can't remember what list ASOS might be in, you can click on the drop-down menu and either select a specific list or just go to all instruments. SharePad will search for ASOS anywhere within our database. So it found a fund that so happened to have ASOS within its code, but it also found ASOS PLC, which was what we were looking for. If we select it and click on OK, it will create a temporary list with ASOS in it because it couldn't jump to it as the FTSE 100 does not contain ASOS. When we're done, we can then click back on FTSE 100 to view our list. Now, there are two buttons here at the top, which are shortcuts for FTSE 100 and FTSE 350, and we can pick any other list from the Other Lists menu. That will include the AIM list. It will include LSE shares, which is the entire universe of London Stock Exchange shares. US 500, which is the S&P 500 list, plus European lists, foreign exchange, and so on. Now, if there are lists that you use more often than others, you can substitute which lists these two buttons associate to. So, for example, if I don't look at the FTSE 350 very often, but I tend to like to see the entire London Stock Exchange list, I can go to LSE shares, click, drag, and drop on the button. And now my shortcut button has become the LSE shares button. And you can do this with any list within this drop-down menu. Now, the next part I'm going to wanted to talk about was the list screen itself. The list screen allows you to view a list of shares and to do things like manipulate it and sort it by using various characteristics of the instrument. I'm going to zoom the list into full view, at least we can see it properly. Now here in the FTSE 100, you'll notice at the top it'll say FTSE 100 sorted by name. That means it's listed alphabetically by name. We don't have to sort it alphabetically by name. We can sort this list using any one of the columns that we see here. So for example, if we want to sort the list by percentage change, we can either select a column and then press the sort button, or if you're using mouse and keyboard, you can double click on a column. If you double click on the same column again, it will sort the list in the inverse order. When you select a column, you will notice that a little red button appears on the right hand side. This is used to resize the column itself. So if we click and drag, we can make the column larger or smaller. The table that you see here is just purely an example. It has the name, the P ratio, percentage change, broker consensus, etc. But you are free to modify this table any way you want. So I'm going to quickly show you how to add columns to a list of shares. If we press the Add Column button at the top, an Add Column dialog box will appear. You will see that the Add Column dialog box is divided into several sections. There's General, which is generic information about the instrument. Price, here you'll find options that have to do with price movement. If you're looking to add a column that shows you the, say, the percentage change over the last 5 years, you'll find it here. Company, this is information about the company, so things are like anything from the website to who the solicitors of a company are, etc. Funds and bonds will contain columns that are with relevant information for funds and bonds. The financial section will contain columns to do with company financials. So here you'll find turnover, profits and borrowings and cash flow information. Ratios, here is where you find all the financial ratios. So P and CAPE and PEG, etc. Rank will allow you to display the company financials as a rank as opposed to a value itself. So for example, you could add a column for turnover, but instead of seeing the actual numerical value for the turnover, you will see where the share ranks by turnover, either within the market, industry or sector, etc. And the last one is technical, where you'll find all technical indicators. If you want to add a column that gives you the latest value of the 20-day moving average, for example, you'll find it here under technicals. You don't have to know where everything is, though. There is a very useful search function in the top right hand corner. So let's try an example. Say we want to add a column with the forecast PE ratio of a share. Well, we type in PE and it'll be our first result here. We select it and it'll immediately jump to the PE ratio. You'll notice here on the right hand side there are many sub options. Now if we just want the 1 year forecast, it's pretty simple. We select 1 year forecast and we click on OK. And now we will have a forecast PE column, which is the 1 year forecast EPS and the most recent close price. That's how it's calculated. If we go back to add column, you can also display not just the financial values themselves, so say for example the turnover, but how the turnover has changed over a period of time. So let's look for turnover. And we'll find turnover. And you'll see at the bottom here there's a calculated as box. Say for example we want to take the most recent turnover, i.e. the turnover from the most recent financial report, and we want to see how it compared to the previous year's financial report. So instead of value of, which would display the actual value of the turnover in millions of pounds, we select growth percentage over 1 year, so compared to the year before, and we can then hit OK. You will notice there's a green add button. If you use that, the column will be added, but the dialog box will remain open, so you don't have to continuously go back to the add column button. Now you'll see there's a turnover percentage change column, and this is the most recent turnover compared to the financial report from the year before. Now there's a third way of adding columns that I'm going to show you, and that is the combine items. While we do give you lots and lots of different options here by default, you might want to combine items in ways that we haven't thought of. Say for example you want to check if the current P ratio of a company is less than its average P over the past, say, 5 years. How do we do that? Well, we would select PE, and we want the most recent P. We will hit Combine Items. Now we'll have a drop-down menu of options that we can choose. So we want to make sure that the current P ratio is less than its average. So I'm going to select is less than. I then press the select button, or I can choose value number 2. Now value number 2 is going to be again P ratio, but I want it as average over 5 years. So what this is going to do, it's going to start from the most recently reported financial year, go back 5 years and calculate the average P ratio over that period. I click on OK. I click on OK again, and here we have it. It will give me a little green tick if what I'm looking for is true, so that the current P ratio is less than the 5-year average P ratio. If it's true, a little tick will appear. If it's not true, it will just return as blank. Now there are several things that you can, other things that you can do with columns. If you click on one of the columns, you will see that the menu, the toolbar items here at the top will change. Deselect will simply deselect the option, the column that we've just selected. Add will again open up the Add Column dialog box, but with a slight variation. You'll see it now has, instead of an OK button, it'll have an Insert Left or Insert Right column. So it will allow you to insert a column either to the left or the right of the selected one. Edit will allow you to modify the column. So this is quite useful if you, say, made a mistake and you actually wanted a 7-year average here on the last column we created. We can select it, we go to Edit, and then you can modify a column that you've already created. So we'll set it to 7, click on OK, and now we've modified our column. The fourth button is Sort, which we've already seen. Rename will allow you to actually rename the column itself. Sometimes, especially when you're using when you're combining columns, the resulting heading could be quite verbose. So if you'd like to change the text that appears on the heading, you can do that. Simply hit Rename, and you're free to edit it to any text you wish. Delete will do exactly that and remove the column entirely. Options will allow you to do things like change the alignment of a text. It will allow you to change the text to a bold font, change the background color of the column. This is quite useful if you have a table with lots of columns but one is particularly important. You can highlight it by changing its background color to a different color. And another interesting option here is column statistics. This will display statistics about this column, what the average value is, and weighted average, median value, what the smallest and largest value are. And the very last set of buttons is Move. This will allow you to move the column left or right, so you can rearrange the columns as you require them. If we go back to a split screen mode, you will see now that we cannot fit the columns that we've added on the screen at the same time. Now, you could either resize the display, but that might end up with a graph that is not particularly useful. The other thing you can do is to scroll. Now, all you need to do is point your mouse arrow or finger if you're using a tablet, click and drag to scroll through the columns without having to actually resize the window in any way. You'll notice that the first columns here are not moving, and you can set the number of fixed columns that appear here by pressing the design button at the bottom. If we press it, we can set number of fixed columns. If we change this to 4, now the name column has also become a fixed column, so if we click and drag, that doesn't move anymore. One last thing I'd like to talk about is this events column. The events column will display little symbols to show particular events that are either upcoming or have just occurred in the immediate past. X, for example, will display X dividend dates, and if you click on the X itself, a little pop-up will appear giving you the details, and it's letting us know that 3i Group went X dividend today. R symbol, this will talk about results. So if we click on it, we can see that Ashted's Q2 results were announced a couple of days ago on the 11th. And you'll also see symbols for things like dividend payment dates, which is this little green D. And there are other symbols like suspension symbols to let you know that a company has been suspended, etc. But if you want to know what the symbol is, click on it and that will give you the information. In fact, talking about that, you'll notice that some columns have got this strange little blue triangle in the top right hand corner. That means that you can actually click on the item itself to show further information. So for example, if I click on the PE, it will give me average daily Ps over a period of time, and this data can also be exported at the click of a button. If you wish to use any of SharePad's data for your own further analysis outside of a program itself, say on an Excel spreadsheet, tables can be exported. If we go under sharing, export table, it will allow you to export the table. This is true for all lists except for FTSE index lists, which FTSE forbids the exporting of. But if we were to go to the list of the entire London Stock Exchange, we can export all of this data for every single share on the London Stock Exchange, and the program will save it as a CSV file, which you can open up in Excel or any other database program. Now we're going to look at the green section on the right hand side. So I am going to zoom the green section in full view. The first section is chart, which is going to show you the chart of the selected instrument. The chart here will, I'm going to go into a tiny bit of detail, but we are planning to do a separate full webinar specifically on technical analysis. Charts here, you'll see some buttons here at the bottom. These are several different templates for the chart. So for example, buy and hold, one we call buy and hold, is a long-term bar chart. Intraday candles will show you a an intraday, a 30-minute candlestick chart over the last 5 days. It's still the same. It's still the same share. It's still Admiral Group, but it's with a different chart setup. If you wish to edit a chart in any way, you can use the buttons at the top to do things like change the time frame that's being used. So if you hit custom, we can change it from 1 year to 2 weeks to 10 years. And you can do things like add moving averages, Donkin channels, and Darvas boxes, or add or remove indicators below the chart. You can also press the design button in the bottom left, and that will open up options on the way that the graph looks. So things like the color of the line and how the axes are displayed on the left or right hand side of the chart. Now, one thing that you can do, if you are in the green section and it's in full view, you don't have to then go back into a split screen mode in order to select the next share in the list. If you are in if you have zoomed the green section into full screen, you can move to the next share in the list by simply hitting the spacebar key on your keyboard, and that will move to the next share in the list, and the next share is the next share in whichever order you've decided to put the list in. So now I'm back to alphabetical order, so it's the next share in alphabetical order. If you want to go back up the list, it's shift spacebar and it will go up the list. If you are using a tablet and so don't have an actual keyboard, you'll notice that two semi-transparent arrow buttons will appear in the bottom right hand corner of the chart. You can use those, you can tap those with your finger to do exactly what the spacebar button does on a device with a keyboard. And again, you don't have to be in the list to search. If I do this, it will jump to GlaxoSmithKline again. Now, the next section on the green screen is the financials page. Here is where you will find all the company's financial information I'm going to go through. So SharePad, we worked very hard to try and make the financial data, which sometimes can be extremely terrifying and confusing, as easy to read as possible. And to do that, we have created what we call the dashboard. The dashboard will include an overview panel, which should help you to, at a glance, see if there's anything that you should be worried about. And what we've done, we've used a simple traffic light coloring system, green, red and yellow then, for all okay, things you should be things that you should check, and then things that you should be worried about. If you don't know what any of these are, as you probably noticed, if you click on one of the boxes, a little box will open up and give you a full explanation of what that value is. The information that's displayed on this screen, on the summary screen, will change depending on the type of instrument. So currently we're looking at GlaxoSmithKline. It's not a financial company. It actually makes things, and so this is the kind of information that will be displayed for non-financial companies. So it will be a mining stock or an oil stock or a pharmaceutical stock will show information this way. If I were to change this to a bank, like Barclays, for example, the information displayed here, which choice of values that are displayed on the dashboard will change slightly, and accordingly then. And there'll be then a separate one for insurance companies. And again, insurance companies will have their own style dashboard. In the top right hand corner of the summary page, or immediately below, depending on the on how you're viewing it, if you show it on a split screen, you'll see the information is vertically, is displayed vertically. But what we have here is just a quick overview of what the long-term price performance has been for the share. So we will see in green the share itself, in orange the shares sector index, and in grey the shares main index, in this case FTSE 100, and they'll be here also in tabular form. Below, we will have what we call the carousel. And again, this is be slightly different depending if you're looking at a bank or an insurance company or a non-financial company. But essentially, this carousel allows you to dig a bit deeper. So it presents about 20 different financial charts for each stocks with little guiding text below it that will help you interpret the data. And the idea of it is to help you spot trends and cycles, and so it's there to help you quickly have a good idea. It should only take you a couple of minutes to have a good idea if the company's income, growth, and general safety are within expected norms, or if there's something to be concerned about. And you'll see under key data, you'll see these little arrows. They allow you to move from one carousel item to the next. And there are at the top, there are tabs. So there are carousel items for quality, safety, and valuation. The financials page does contain lots of different subsections. The summary page should be the one where you'll spend probably most of your time on. You should immediately be able to see if it's worth digging deeper or if it's an instrument that you should just abandon. Company. The next tab, company, will give you information about the company. Things like a summary of what the company does, who the directors are, generic company information like website, contact telephone number and address, and who various advisors and stock brokers, financial PRs, etc. are. Key dates, things like when the last and the next financial report was due and is due. Sometimes you will see it will say estimated here. That means that the date has not been confirmed yet by Admiral, and so the date that we see here as the next date for the Q2 is still an estimation based on what last year's date was. And below here we will have an activity breakdown, so we can see where the got turnover, profit and assets, but we can see where the turnover is coming from, and here is by region, and here it's all marked as unallocated, so the company does not disclose the region where the turnover is, but they do disclose where their turnover is coming from on a product by product basis. And if we pick, again going to good old GlaxoSmithKline, here for example we can see that there is actually a split by region. So there's a good chunk of their revenue comes from the US, only a tiny sliver actually comes from the UK, and then the vast majority comes from the rest of the world. Now the next few sections, these are for anyone who wishes to dig really deep into the company, and these are the full financial figures. It will be divided year by year, and we've tried to create tables of information that are as easy to read as possible. So we have a section for income, so here you'll find turnovers and profit figures. We have a section for balance sheet, so assets and liabilities and debt, etc. There's a tab for the cash flow statement, so again, cash flows from operations, investing, and free cash flow figures. There's a completely separate section for financial ratios. So here you will find everything from the P ratio, ROC, and so on. And it will allow you to view them year by year. And we do have decades of financial data. Here I'm displaying from 2008 to 2017, but we can go back in the past using the previous and next arrow buttons here in the top left. The dividend tab will show you the entire dividend history of a share, every single dividend payment. So if you need to find out any information about when a particular dividend was paid or how much it was, you can see it here. And the last section here is where you'll find all the forecasts. Our forecast data comes from Standard & Poor's, who collect forecasts from dozens of different brokers around the UK. They then calculate average forecast values based upon all the opinions, and that information is what you see here. You can see, for example, here at the bottom the forecast turnover, EBITDA, and EPS, and dividend, etc., and a opinion. So we can see, for example, that there are 5 brokers that recommend a buy, 4 have outperform, 12 hold, 1 underperform, and 0 are giving a sell recommendation. You can also see what the average is, which is just slightly above the outperform level, and you can see how the opinion has changed over time. This is going back to 2015. You can also see how the forecast has changed over time. If we look, it will say here forecast item turnover, and we can see how the forecast turnover has changed. So it looks like since 2016 the forecast turnover for the year ending 2018 has increased then over time, and then slightly decreased, and then gone back up to the level that it's now. Now the financials page is going to change completely if the instrument that you're viewing is not a share. So for example, if we were to open up a fund, let's say an investment trust, you will see that this page will change completely, and let's see it. If we pick Scottish Mortgage Investment Trust and click on OK, the summary page will now display information about that is useful then about the fund. So we'll still have a performance chart like with a share, but we'll now have information like what the Morningstar fund rating is, which is a 1 to 5 star rating that Morningstar gives to funds. This is an investment trust, so we can see what the current premium discount to net asset value is. We can see what the Z-score and what the total expense ratio of a fund is. We'll also have information like the names of the actual fund manager, what their AIC sector is, and some other useful information like what their distribution frequency is. The most interesting part, I think, of this section is the activity breakdown and this other section here at the bottom. The activity breakdown will give you the top 10 investments that the fund is making, either by actual holdings, so we can see that, for example, 10.5% of Scottish Mortgage Investment Trust is in Amazon. The next largest company is Illumina Inc., and so on and so forth. We can also see what the breakdown is by sector. So we can see that, for example, 36.8% of the fund is in specialty retail. The next largest sector, 34.7%, is internet content and information, and so on and so forth. And you have different ways of displaying the activity breakdown of a fund. On the left hand side, you will see what the top funds in this particular sector are. So by sector, this is the AIC sector, marked as global, so normally global equities. The top funds in this sector is going to show you what the best funds in the global AIC sector are measured over 1 year, 5 years, and 10 years. And these are the top investment trusts in this sector, again measured over 1 year, 5 years, and 10 years. And you can see what their performance was over that period. And if you click on any one of them, it will jump to that fund. So if you found a fund that you like, the program will find maybe a fund that is even better than the one that you have already identified. Now the next section I was going to show you is portfolios. Now, up till now, we've seen some of the pre-built lists that exist in the program. So FTSE 100, LSE shares, and things like foreign exchange. And by the way, in case you were wondering, all the cryptocurrencies are under the foreign exchange list. So you'll find Bitcoin here. Here it is. Not doing as great as it once was, but of course you can build your own lists, and that's where portfolios come in. So let's build our first portfolio. You'll see at the top there's a port button, and we can then click on select a portfolio, and here we'll see the list of all of our portfolios, and you can build as many as you wish. There'll be one included in the program when you first subscribe, and it is just an example to show you what you can do. But if we create a new portfolio, and I'm going to call it my example, we can then choose the type of portfolio. Now, normally you would want to create a normal portfolio. The program allows you to create group portfolios. A group portfolio allows you to merge multiple portfolios together into one larger portfolio. This is useful if you are managing several different portfolios. Say for yourself and your family members, you might be managing your own ISA, your husband's ISA, and your son and daughter's ISA, but you want to see how the whole family is doing as a whole. So you have 4 portfolios for the 4 members of the family. You can then create a group portfolio which will merge these 4 together to see what the family is doing. But for now, we'll only create a normal portfolio. Portfolio currency. This is the currency in which all the transactions are going to be recorded. Now, you can add shares from different currencies, so you can add Amazon in the same portfolio where you have GlaxoSmithKline. That's not a problem. But if you select pound sterling, then all of your purchases and sales, including your purchases and sales for Amazon shares, will be recorded in pound sterling. You can change this, of course. You can change it to euros or US dollars if you want to change the currency of a portfolio. So here it is, our new example portfolio. I've got it. I click on OK, And now what I see is a completely empty list. So we need to start populating this list. There are two ways of populating a list. The first is if you know what instrument you want to add to the portfolio. Within the portfolio, simply go to Add to Port, click on Search for an instrument, and let's go back to our faithful Glaxo. We select which one we want, and now it's searching throughout the entire universe of shares. So it's found not only GlaxoSmithKline as traded on the London Stock Exchange, but it's also found GlaxoSmithKline as traded on the New York Stock Exchange. So do pay attention what it says here at the top, because it will tell you where the instrument is traded, because there are lots of especially large companies that are traded in multiple places. So we want the LSE Glaxo. We'll click on OK. And now our portfolio is made up of one instrument. Now you might not know what you want to add to your portfolio. You might be scrolling through a list of shares and suddenly spot a share, maybe after you've been looking at the carousel of the financial summary page. You spot a share that you're interested in, so you want to add it to a portfolio. You can build portfolios just simply as watch lists, so of shares to keep an eye on. Now to do that, if we go to the list of all the London Stock Exchange shares, and we scroll down, and suddenly we find a share that we are interested in, and say Godwin PLC. Well, we can now go to the Add to Port menu at the top, and an option will appear, say Add Selected Share to My Example. It will always offer you to, or it will always offer to add the share to the currently selected portfolio. So the currently selected portfolio is simply the last portfolio that you were viewing. So my example. And if I click on it, the share will have been added to the portfolio. Now, there is another way of adding shares to a portfolio. Say you are interested in adding all the shares to a portfolio that have a high dividend yield. Well, now we're back on the FTSE 100 list. I will sort the FTSE 100 list by dividend yield, highest at the top, and say I'm interested in companies that pay more than 5% dividend. Well, I can now scroll down to the last share that I consider as acceptable. I go to Add to Port, and then I'll click on the option that says Add Selected and All Above to My Example, and that will add the selected share and every share above it in the list. When you're adding huge numbers of shares to a portfolio, a little pop-up will appear in the corner just in case you clicked on it accidentally and you didn't flood your portfolio with hundreds of shares you had no interest in. If you hit undo, it will just undo the last function, the last thing that you did. We don't want to undo that. We actually want to keep those shares. When you want to go back to your portfolio, you don't have to go back to the portfolio menu because the last portfolio will always appear on this button here. So clicking this button will always open up the last portfolio that we were viewing. So in this case, my example portfolio. And here it is. It's filled in with GlaxoSmithKline, Goodwin PLC, and all the other shares that we added from the FTSE 100. Now, you could just do this. You have built a portfolio with your, which is just a watch list. So you have your own list, and you can add and remove items. Now, let's have a look at removing items. Select one, and you will find a delete item option appear at the top. Click on it, and the share will be removed from the portfolio. But another thing that you can do, of course, is actually keep track of your investments. So record all your purchases and sales and dividends that you've made in your portfolio. When you've got a portfolio selected, the trans button will become available. If you're looking at a FTSE 100 list, this button is disabled. Now the trans button opens up is short for transactions, which will open up all of the transactions for this portfolio. Moment it's completely blank. If you look at the bottom, here is where we can add the transactions. So I am going to show you an example. Add cash transaction allows you to add cash, credit, or debit any cash. Obviously, if you add more cash to your ISA account, you can click on credit and add the amount that you've deposited. If you withdraw any money, you can click on debit and it will decrease the available cash. We'll start off by crediting our fictional portfolio with do a lot of money, and you can obviously backdate this, so we can go back in time and select a date in November 2015, for example. There we go, so 20th November 2015. You don't have to worry about the time unless you have recorded multiple transactions on the same date, and it is important to know in which order those transactions occurred. In that case, do pay attention to the time and not just at the date, because the time will then determine in which order transactions that occurred on the same date happen. And if you wish, you can add a little note. So you can add there we go, that's initial credit. I click on OK. And now the performance chart has now appeared. It is obviously a flat line because I deposited £10,000 3 years ago and did nothing else. But I can start recording actual transactions. So if I go back to my trusty GlaxoSmithKline, I select the share. I can now click on the Add Tran button to record a buy against GlaxoSmithKline. So I'm going to buy 700 shares at £13 with a £11.95 charge, but I am retroactively recording this as having happened on the 11th of December 2015. I click on OK, and here we have it. I'm going to now expand this into full screen so we can see it properly. What I can see here is the main line for Glaxo. We can hide all the details and only see the main line if you're not interested in seeing all the purchases and sales. And so we can see the name, the number of shares we currently own, the current price of a share and how much it cost us and what the current value is, and what our unrealized profit is. This is obviously potential profit because this £1,300 could go up as well as down. And then the return actually as a percentage. If we click on the drop down menu, we can then see the full list of all transactions. In this case, there's just one transaction, one buy. And we can go on and keep on recording transactions. We could go add transaction, record a sell. The thing I wanted to show you is the dividend recording system. Now, this is very useful if you are building your portfolio retroactively. And again, you're going back to 2017, 16, 15, and so on to record transactions that you made a long time ago. You don't have to then record every single dividend that you received from the share. All you need to do is record your purchases and sales, and SharePad will know based on your purchases and sales which dividends you were entitled to and how much you would have received, because it has a record of all that. So after you've recorded all your purchases and sales, you go to Add Tran, Add Dividends automatically, and we can go back to a date in the past. The first time it runs, it will just go back to the date of the very first transaction, in this case the very first cash credit that we made. We hit check, And the program will run through every single dividend. It will check that you were entitled to, and that dividend already does not already exist in the portfolio, and it will highlight all of them here. If for any reason there's a dividend that you do not want recorded, you can just simply uncheck it. When you click on OK, or add, apologies, it will add all of the dividends in one go. At the top here, you will see a quick summary of your portfolio, so the total value of your holdings, how much cash you have available, and the total value, and how the value of your portfolio has changed in the last day, month, year to date. That's from the 1st of January this year, and over the last rolling 12 months. You can toggle the chart on and off by pressing a button here. And you can change the view by using the buttons at the top. Cash will open up the list of all of the transactions not divided by share, so each share is grouped together. Here it's sorted by date, so you can check the transactions in date order. So if this is more like a bank statement. Value on date allows you to then compare the value of your portfolio on two dates of your choice. Here we're looking at between, well, the first day in the portfolio's history and the current day, but you can simply pick any two dates you want and it will show you the change in value between the first and the last date. And very last one here, if you're lucky enough to have made enough money that you need to pay tax, the program comes with a capital gains tax report and also a dividends tax report for then income purposes. Now we are almost on the hour, so I am going to quickly go through one last section, which is the news section. The news section, this allows you to view news. We have two sources of news. We have Dow Jones Newswires, which will it's a new UK-centric journalistic news feed. It's a bit like reading the Financial Times. And we have RNS, which is a regulatory news service from the London Stock Exchange. This is where you will see all the announcements that companies have to make by law. They'll be announced this way. So financial reports, changes in directors, and so on. You'll see three buttons at the top. All news. This will display all the news. It doesn't matter which share you've got selected on your list. It doesn't matter. It will show you just all the news, unfiltered, everything, and you'll see it as news stories come in. You'll see them appear at the top here. Current list. This will show you all the news which is relevant for the current list that you got selected. So at the moment we've got the portfolio, so it's showing me all the news for all of the shares in my portfolio. Current share will show you the news just for the currently selected share, so GlaxoSmithKline in this case. At the bottom you will see a button, Dow Jones and RNS. This will allow you to toggle the RNS news feed or the Dow Jones news feed on and off, so you can have just one or just the other or both. Now the program relies on journalistic tags to determine if a news story is relevant for a company or not, i.e. whoever writes the story will tag the story as being relevant for GlaxoSmithKline and therefore will appear. That means that not necessarily all stories that mention the company, GlaxoSmithKline, will be tagged as being relevant for Glaxo. If you want to do a deep search, you can click on mentions. That will show you every single story that contains the name of the company within the body of the text. It will give you, there's no risk of missing any news story, but of course because it's a pure text search you might find information that isn't as interesting or as relevant. You'll notice that some of the headlines here are marked in red text. These are news stories that are tagged as hot news, so news that is important. You can press the button here at the bottom and that will only show you hot news. The last button here is corporate actions. So instead of showing the news, it will display the corporate actions as reported by the company to the London Stock Exchange. If we click on this, it will make announcements like return on capital, special dividends, splits, consolidations, etc. Now we do have many years worth of news. You can move page by page by simply using the arrow buttons here. So if I click on older, it goes to previous page and so on and so forth. If we're looking for a specific event that happened on a specific date, you can simply jump to that date by setting the date here in the calendar and click on go to date, and it will jump to that specific date in the past. What you can also do is create filters. If you go to filter and apply manage filters, it will allow you to create filters based on certain keywords. So say you're looking for news stories that contain the words above expectations. For example, you can create a filter here, do a search for the words above expectations, and the program will limit the news that you see to only news stories that contain the words above expectations. I don't have the time to go into a lot of detail, but if you go to the support page on our website, you will find a detailed tutorial about that. And before we move to our Q&A section, I would like to give you just a very quick view of this market page, which I said we were going to look at later. Market view, this can be an interesting starting point on your daily activities. This will give you a nice little overview of what the markets are doing. So it will show you a little chart of major indices, DAX, CAC, the FTSE 100 and NASDAQ, S&P, etc. Plus tables with the risers and fallers within the market. So, for example, the top 5 risers and the top 5 fallers within FTSE 100, or the S&P 500 here at the bottom. And we've got different setups. So we have the international markets, but we can click on commodities here at the bottom, and it will give us a little overview of where all the various commodities are at this moment. So we can see, for example, what the price of platinum has been doing over last year and so on. And we have then an overview for things like gilts and bonds, and we can see where the US 2-year Treasury yield is at this moment in time, the 10-year, and then the FTSE or Eurozone, etc. And we can also see what the biggest rises and fallers in gilts and retail bonds and corporate bonds are. There's a little summary here for foreign exchange with a neat little table which you can then you can also edit using the design button here at the bottom. You can add and remove currencies as you please, and the program will give you a nice little table of how each converts to each other. And the last one here is a UK economic market overview. It will give you these are very long-term graphs. So, for example, what the retail price index has been since 1915, gross domestic product, what the employment rate is, and unemployment rate, house price index, and so on and so forth. This is just a quick overview. If you would like to see things like the foreign exchange into in more detail, you can go to other lists and select foreign exchange, or if you want to look at certain economic values into more details, you can click on economic data and the list will appear. For example, we can now look at a nice long-term chart of the consumer price index, for example. This is where we're going to stop. If you were wondering where the discussion about the filtering feature in SharePad is, that will require a webinar all by itself, so we will then inform everybody when that webinar is going to happen. So I'm now going to be taking, if you have any questions, write them in on, you can write them in the chat and I will answer. I'll try to answer well, as many of you give. Like, for example, I can see, can you get a market view of your own portfolios? I'll show you. If we go to the market overview, at the bottom here, there's a drop-down menu that says setting. If we click on it, we can create a spanking new setting. So I'm going to call it my market. There we go. And now we'll click on the design button and we can choose what instruments we want on. So we hit on add and we add our trusty GlaxoSmithKline. Click on OK. And then we add Barclays. Now unfortunately there isn't any direct link with a list, so you do still have to add these one by one, and you can't just say add all the shares in this portfolio, but you can build this table of those little charts using any instrument in the program. I'm going to add, there we go, let's add Vodafone and click on OK. And here we can set things like the size of a little graph that appears, so small, medium, large. And we'll hit preview. There we go. We can make them larger. And hit preview. They'll be larger. Rise and fallers allow you to add the top 5 rises and fallers from whichever list you want. So if we hit add, we can show the top rises in the FTSE 100. We can show the top rises in the AIM 100. In the entire London Stock Exchange, and say the S&P 500 and the top ETFs. And here they are. And the very last section here is where you can add those nice little tables of currencies that we saw before, and we can just pick any currency or as many currencies as we want, and it will get added to the table, and the program will just build a table comparing every currency against each other. And there we go. Click on OK, and here is our little currency table. Of course, it will expand as the time goes on then. Right, okay, so how do you add a 90 or 200 day rolling average to a chart? Okay, let's go back to, let's pick up FTSE 100 stock. That will be under moving averages. So under the add menu, moving averages, and here you can edit any existing moving average by pressing the edit button, or hit the create button to add more. So we can select, for example, 90 periods, and it's going to be an exponential moving average. Click on OK, and here we'll make it blue. Click on OK and OK, and now if we actually set it back to a year, there we go. There's our blue 90-day exponential moving average. The Bard, I think when you try to add a share fund to portfolio, when you try it deletes the others, it probably is not. But if, for example, if you are in your portfolio, and instead of going here and clicking on search for an instrument, you just start typing and say I want to add ASOS, and I do this, it will, if you select ASOS, click on OK, it won't actually add it to the portfolio. It will create a separate list with a share because you just performed a search. You weren't actually adding it. So you should, if you have your portfolio open, go to add to port, search for an instrument, search for what you're looking for, ASOS, click on OK, and that should add ASOS to your portfolio. Bruce Bernard, is it possible to set the decimal places on the left side of the table? No, we are currently working on a system to actually allow the user to set the number of decimal places. We found it was a little harder than we initially anticipated because it kind of made it really hard to read on certain tablets if you increase or decrease. So we're working on that, and we hope to have that an editable number of decimals for columns out in the future. And yes, Vibard, you can review this. YouTube will automatically upload this as soon as I finish the stream, so it will be available literally in a few minutes. What I'm going to do is probably edit it a little bit because there'll be about 20 minutes of silence at the beginning, and then re-upload it either tomorrow or Monday. Last here we have the Bard's momentum. How can we build our own chart? Well, the charts, as I said, I will be doing a separate webinar then to go into charts into a lot of detail because there is a lot to speak of. But if you want to create your own charts with your own options, there are, as I said, there are several default charts here, examples, but if you go under the settings menu, you can then press create new, and it will create a new blank chart which you're then free to modify in any way you wish. And Lawrence Richardson, absolutely, you can import a portfolio, especially, yes, if you have years and years of hundreds of transactions. There is a specific format that the file needs to be in. If you go to our website and you go under the support menu, click on SharePad, scroll down under the portfolio section, and you'll see there's an importing tutorial, and it will show you the first part will talk about importing transactions from Stockopedia account if you have that. And there's the next section is how to import from a generic Excel file. And it'll show you what format it should be in, and you can use that then to build your portfolio. Absolutely, have a look at that. Alan NSEW, now you've stumped me. I cannot recall off the top of my head. It depends. Let's have a look with things like guilt and no. No, I think specifically for bonds and gilts, we do not carry the payment details of the coupon. So unfortunately, the program can't do that automatically specifically for bonds and gilts. Can do it for funds and shares. So can you move shares from one portfolio to the other, taking the transactions with them? So if we go back to our portfolio and go to the transaction section, we can select Glaxo, and you will see there's a move button. You can use move set of transactions to another portfolio, which does exactly that. It will move Glaxo and all the associated transactions. And move set of transactions to another instrument. This is particularly useful if the share that you're investing in has been taken over by a different company. So that share has died, but you want to keep the historical record. It will move. You can move all the purchases and sales as if you had always held the new company. And yeah, so Bud, you can't link from your broker directly, but as long as your broker allows you to export your transaction history, you as like an Excel file, you should, with a little bit of rejigging of the data, then create a file that SharePad can understand and then use that to import into the program. Again, I'm going to point you back again to the tutorial on our website. If you have any problems, then you can just contact our support. Can you find estimate revision data for the last 3 months anyway and display it? I imagine you're talking about the forecasts, and yes, you can. Under financials, if you go to forecasts, as I was explaining, we will see here at the bottom, we can see we've selected turnover, but you can select any other value, and you can see what the forecast, what the change in forecast has been. So the current forecast EBITDA is about £10 billion, but you can see that it was 10.5 back at the beginning of 2017 and way down to 9,000 back at the beginning of 2016. So you can see how it's changed over a fairly long period of time. Muthia, you can search for a fund using any, as I said, you can either use the, my advice is definitely to use ISIN codes. That's the easiest way to be absolutely certain that you got the right fund. But if you click on search, I do all instruments, literally in the search box, instead of typing the name, you just start typing the ISIN code. And I'm just trying to guess here ISIN codes, but there we go, GB002. Oh, one thing, as this is popping up, if an instrument stops trading, we never delete it from our system. So you can also find shares that have been delisted. If that's the case, you will see them marked in red in the search results. How do you transfer large portfolios from ShareScope? There's actually an export function. So this is Tony Hoffman. If in ShareScope, if you go to File, Export, you will see an option that says Export Portfolios to SharePad. Click on it. It will ask you for your SharePad login details, and it will export all your portfolios to SharePad. You then go to the Settings button in SharePad, go to Import ShareScope Portfolios. Click on Import Portfolios and you'll see the list of all your portfolios. I haven't done it now, so it will give me 0 results. But you'll see the full list. You can choose which ones you want to import into SharePad, and it'll import everything, the portfolio and all the transactions. Lawrence, the system will take care of the dividends. Yes. Corporate actions like splits, the program does not apply them automatically to your transaction screen, and the reason is that there can sometimes be some rounding necessary, and the program can't know how the broker of the company has actually rounded the shares. So splits and so dividends you don't have to worry about, but splits and consolidations, yes, you do. And yeah, Colin McGregor. The chat is yeah, you're right. We probably didn't mention it in the email. It's yeah, it does require a login to YouTube. And so I think I've got to the end of all of your questions. I am going now to terminate the webinar. As I said, this is the first of what we expect to be many webinars. We will keep you informed when the next one is going to be run. The recording of this will go unedited up literally in a few minutes time on our YouTube channel, and I will be uploading the edited version without all the blank at the beginning and at the end then probably on Friday. And well, thank you very much for listening, and goodbye.